Hello everyone, welcome back to the channel. Today we're diving into the shocking story of Mike Tyson. She remained silent for more than 30 years. Employed throughout the latter part of the 1980s as a private housekeeper in Mike Tyson's residences, she endured the turmoil, that lavishness, and the concealed melancholy behind the world's toughest man. She observed Iron Mike's rise to fame, and then observed that legend starting to disintegrate before her eyes. She observed the anger, loneliness, and unexpected behaviors of generosity, and the eerie times when there were no more people around and Tyson was abandoned by himself at the age of 78. As she ages and her life comes to an end, she has chosen to talk without seeking fame or seeking retaliation, but to ultimately expose the complete reality of what life was like within Tyson's collapsing realm. The actual Tyson, the frightened child within the fierce combatant, the wounded man at the back. The story she kept is the myth. She's ready after being hidden for decades. In all honesty, she acknowledged that she needed the money, but not until she got to the enormous gates of the palace in Ohio that she became aware of her employer. At the age of 21, Mike Tyson was already the heavyweight, without a doubt world champion, an unusual experience, everything that America has yet to witness. He was only a young man and wasn't Iron Mike. Walking on marble floors while barefoot, yelling directions to a bunch of overwhelmed employees for the first time, the feeling was one of shock rather than dread. The house was a complete mess, with strange animals wandered throughout the grounds, including 3 Bengal tigers in their prime who relaxed. Luxury automobiles were idly parked around the pool, dispersed around the yard as though abandoned mid-distance companions, trainers, and the hallways were populated by total strangers. At some people are always carrying suitcases of cash, others appeared to have just she had clean mansions and never left. Previously, but never in this manner, Tyson's world was a bizarre carnival. Circus of noise, wealth, and notoriety that Tyson himself never slept. Captivating in a single instant, he would welcome pulling her with a childish enthusiasm to meet him in the backyard. Cherished birds. The next time he disappeared returned with bruises after hours of bloodshot eyes and knuckles. Despite his insanity, he was always courteous to her. "Your family now," he informed her once, with a broad smile. "Your family work for me." However, even then she felt the disturbing presence underneath. In a sense, the surface, Tyson was restless. She had never noticed his inability to remain motionless. He was there for more than a few minutes, either bouncing on the shadow of his toes, pacing, or boxing intangible opponents. He had an animal's body, like a caged animal. Warrior. But a boy's soul was left behind too soon, and as the months passed, she became aware that she wasn't merely as a housekeeper. She silently observed something much more harmful than a man racing toward the direction of the Tyson's edge. A mansion was more than simply a house. It was alive, breathing being powered by daily excess and adrenaline. Paranoia seemed to be a conflict between heaven and occasionally. The house would be in a state of Tyson would dance while laughing, elevating his tiger's head in the living room, pause like a showman, or a throwback recordings of school souls through the enormous speakers as boxing instructors attempted to join him for spontaneous exercises. Employees, visitors, and even complete strangers from the local community was invited to the Tyson's barbecue pit, nearly burned out every weekend. But the enthusiasm on other days would abruptly shift. Doors slamming with discussions about bone-rattling force typically came from behind closed doors. Over financial women or commercial transactions that were getting out of hand. She discovered how to go through the disorderly cleanup near the perimeter of ducking out of sight while shouting matches when Tyson's emotions became dark. At any given time, Tyson might be extremely generous. He once gave each employee member $1,000 in cash during a heated argument. "We're all champions," they said, laughing. Today, he purchased a new vehicle once more, just due to the fact that the dude appeared worn out when he left the gate. Tyson wasn't naturally harsh, But his generosity came and went across him like storms. Let him down or just be at fault. Location when he became enraged and you were occasionally fired without cause. The home was packed, which served as a warning. Of individuals present for the good athletes are often promoted by celebrities. Some hangers remained for weeks, drinking all night long and exhausting. Others are drained by Tyson's kindness, departed as swiftly as they had appeared. Behind nothing but unpaid bills and rumors, despite everything, she witnessed Tyson receiving. The masses surrounding him became more crowded, thicker, but the genuine faith he placed in he was a man imprisoned as people became slimmer. In an odd jail he created for himself, rich beyond belief, well known beyond faith, but in the silent times when the hangers went off and the music stopped, she occasionally caught him sitting at home, tossing outside by the koi pond alone, watching as breadcrumbs fall into the lake, looking off into the distant. For something that he had long since lost, it didn't occur all at once, and the fall arrived slowly, similar to a tire's steady leak that nobody realizes until the vehicle is moving. Tyson's actions on its rims are consistently erratic began to creep into something darker. The anger became more intense. There are days when the mood fluctuates more sharply. He would shut himself in his sleeping quarters for hours, coming out with glassy red eyes, and other days, he has a dangerously nervous energy. Refused to get out of bed, vanishing into a spooky quiet that even the hardest-hearted people are uneasy. She caught glimpses of bodyguards in brief intervals. Tyson initially forgot the names of long-time employees, becoming disoriented where he should have been putting cash sums in the tens of thousands. His temper changed as if it were loose, more frequently flared, and the walls of the once shining white, the mansion began displaying cracks and dents from being tossed items that the group altered less, more strangers with slicks than old friends, more people wearing suits and fake grins accepting him. Know of how awful the concepts. She heard discussions regarding battles. He shouldn't accept endorsements since should not run and should not sign risks. However, nobody told Mike that no one dared to. Body began to exhibit wear as well. She would discover ice packs left and bloody towels left in the restrooms by the gym-related injuries reoccurring, and then there was Tyson's paranoia. Installed additional security cameras and hired. He began having sexual relations with additional guards. Baseball bats and other weapons close to his bed, knives, even handguns. When questioned about why "You never know who's coming," he stated simply, "For you." She remained through it all, tidying up the mess and seeing the gradual breakdown of a man who once seemed unbeatable. It was more than simply celebrity. It was the loneliness that was poisoning him. Dread the heartbreaking knowledge that no one lacks funds and an army of no world titles could defend bodyguards. From the demons that are forming inside of him in my own imagination, there were countless ladies. Some of them were celebrities. Others drifted with anonymous faces. Like ghosts, they moved through the mansion. Arrived laughing and departed crying. Initially, it was all included in the presentation. Tyson's bad boy persona was fostered by King, who was entitled to anything. The maid and other employees were told to refrain from asking inquiries. Don't she learn to talk, not gaze, and not judge? To maintain a downward gaze while women paraded through the opulent corridors, some remaining, some staying for days, others for only a few hours. On some mornings, she would discover remnants of the visitors' perfume, jewelry, and towels left in a bathroom, tears that dried on the pricey silk of Tyson's associations with the couches. If one may say that they were never based on a relationship or trust, they were based on loneliness that was passed off as conquest, as a last-ditch effort to fill emptiness that even he couldn't comprehend. But the foreigner's procession only made Tyson. He grew more erratic the more alone he was. More erratic following the women's departure. When the lights went out, the celebrations were over. Sometimes she would discover him by himself, eating in the enormous, deserted kitchen cereal straight out of his naked box. The marble floors being scratched by foot, staring similar to a lost boy in a castle with become too large for him to control. The parties became too wild and disorganized. Activities that took up whole weekends, rappers, actresses, and athletes all arrived at drugs were flowing like a bath in Tyson's orbit as the debates about champagne erupted into first conflicts left the staff's apartments in ruins. She stopped in waves and continued to move in silence. Via the debris, repairing what she could, act as though you didn't hear the yelling games and crying on the phone. One evening following a particularly vicious party, she discovered Tyson unconscious on his beloved Bengal tiger curled in the lawn. He wasn't standing protectively next to him. Despite wearing shoes, his fists remained clenched as though battling adversaries alone. He could see that she had a blanket over him and sat close by till daybreak, keeping watch over him as a mother would observe a child who had ventured into the dark too far. At last, the storm arrived early. It had been simmering for years before the 1990s. Rising low rumble beneath Tyson's feet, louder with each purr-choice, that unbridled anger for every warning that is disregarded when the legal issues hit hard and persistently inside the mansion. Everything changed. The home that was formerly filled with Tyson's group now felt as though life was haunted. Drastically shrunk old buddies vanished, and the house became increasingly empty. Those who remained moved with caution, careful movements, as though frightened of awakening something awful that had become established. She could see Tyson's terror in the walls. The unbeatable champion's eyes were now the media, surrounded like a hunted man. Reporters from Vultures set up camp outside the lawsuits piled up on the kitchen gates counters adjacent to the outstanding invoices. Attorneys arrived and left with their briefcases. Tyson halted because of the terrible news. Training in the same manner as before, late afternoons are when he once towering body, he hardly softened. Some days, she wouldn't talk to anyone, observe him at all. Only indications that he was living, a heavy, empty cereal bowl, boxing gloves that were left on. The TV left the chair flickering, and she recalled one vacant room. In the afternoon, Tyson sat by himself at the unopened items surrounding the kitchen table. He bowed his head and his hands in letters remained still until he eventually said, his hardly more than a whisper, everyone gone now. He remarked. She wanted to say anything. However, she was aware that no words could restore what was damaged. The opulent, the mansion's paint started to peel. Carpets discolored from incomplete remodeling were left behind in the middle, as though the mansion itself originally reflected Tyson's life. Grand is currently collapsing because too many conflicts have destroyed the once glamorous. The estate has turned into a fantasy tomb that had passed away before Tyson knew it. Her last days of employment were gone. Tyson arrived silently and hardly noticed. In the midst of there was no formal farewell among the commotion. Formal conclusion. One morning, she just discovered that she was packing her belongings, knowing automatically that her stay there was. Tyson didn't stop her because he wasn't the boy who used to dance, was no longer. He was elderly and walked barefoot around the corridors. The fatigue is carried more slowly and heavier. Of a man who has dedicated his whole childhood to fighting battles that they shared, but he couldn't win. In the vast entrance, for a time, both pretending to be unaffected by the sadness, Tyson merely gave her a nod in the air. With bloodshot eyes he said, "Thank you," softly. "Nothing more," he murmured, and she departed without fanfare, bringing back a handful of her recollections. Nobody else on the planet would ever have her stored their memories in a closed compartment, for she saw from a distance for decades as Tyson's through bankruptcy, life became twisted. She witnessed the act of redemption and regeneration. Headlines, arrests, and incarceration, the failed union. She witnessed the Broadway, the novels, and documentaries demonstrate that everyone wanted a share of the Tyson tale. But she was acquainted with a Tyson who the frightened, lonely boy who attempted didn't to use money and power to fill a bottomless hole and women the potential crush someone in the ring, but break down due to a betrayal and whispers. The man who never genuinely got away from the street ghosts at the end of her life, that brought him up own life, which she has chosen to share. Tale, not to embarrass him but to respect the truth, to serve as a reminder to everyone that even the most vicious fighters bleed, even the most renowned champions break. And occasionally the best battles aren't waged under dazzling lights in front of boisterous crowds. They battle in deserted mansions in quiet spaces without anyone to offer encouragement. In the years following her departure from the Maid saw Mike Tyson's life from a distance. She wasn't surprised by what she saw. It merely validated the severe injuries. She had seen Tyson's celebrity up close, kept bringing him both praise and admiration, and ruined the millions he previously possessed. Tossed about so recklessly, vanished into handlers' managers' pockets, leeches, insolvency ensued, and what she observed a public unraveling. Conversations in which he appeared to spiral, uttering startling remarks and starting arguments with reporters, giggling for a moment and furious the following time. She saw the rhythm of the desperate swings immediately between daring and the longing for love. The world's abandonment of him was same. Once Tyson went about his mansion, lost and angry in the halls at night without being aware of the reasons behind the fleeting flashes of I hope. The Maid caught a sight of Tyson when he attempted to repair, she once knew initially with little performing parts. Then, with his solo Broadway performance, he sat on that platform and spoke his tale, or the version that the world was prepared for, at least to hear him discuss the brutality of his early years, the death of Customato, the Don King's treachery, and the unending mayhem that came after his ascent to prominence. Cheered, sobbed, and clapped as if atonement. But she understood the more profound reality. On stage, Tyson was just another performance, that is, another expertly constructed disguise so ordered to live in a world that has never genuinely cared for the inner fearful boy. He wasn't precisely lying. He was simply narrating the sections of the tale that he could coexist with her in peaceful times. She would question if he was at peace. She hoped that no one could survive without him, forever in that much misery, but a portion to her thought that Tyson's wars, they had just moved, but the fight wasn't done. Internal conflicts that are fought without being seen, without people, without cameras, and alone, without even an old maid's comfort silently clearing away the remnants behind. Only in her own later years did it happen. When she became aware of how profoundly, in some ways, Tyson's narrative reflected her own. She had never thought of herself as similar to him, had learned at a young age to conceal and bury suffering. Apprehension underlying diligence and quiet, such as she had trusted those who didn't trust him. She created barriers because she deserved it, just like him. Her heart is so high that even kindness had a hard time getting in. Observing Tyson's ascent and decline had been like witnessing a premonition that she was unable to halt a slow-motion tragedy from happening. She recalled the initial times when he was still a timid but strong child, admiring the world that had been given to him prior to the world teaching him to be suspicious before his popularity hardened him, everyone prior to the betrayals. His heart, there were numerous items she turned into stone. I wish she had stated that at the time. That feeling afraid was acceptable rather than each tear was a sign of a man's weakness. The number of belts was not a measure of worth. How many opponents he struck down or how many he won out, but she had kept quiet too if she played that part, since it was the unwritten rule in Tyson's society is that nobody informed the monarch when the realm was burning. Now, as she sits in silence tiny home long after Tyson's fading based on the news of the day, she believed regarding the bruises that weren't visible on skin, the ones that persisted within, as she had as many of them as Soul Tyson did. She has a box hidden in her closet. A box containing recollections from those years, a vintage image of Tyson grinning at the arms of the camera hung over the shoulders. A ticket stub from one of his squad members during his early battles. He wrote a note formerly departed from the kitchen counter expressing gratitude for the food she prepared kept everyone around long after the majority of the world changed, yet they served as reminders that of a boy who never became a legend remained lost despite the world's declared him a champion at the age of 91. She concluded that it was time to tell. Her narrative is not for financial gain or retaliation. However, Tyson's mythology had actually been constructed, polished, and marketed 100 various ways by now. Everyone believed they were aware that he was the bad guy, the warrior, the comeback king, the boy the criminal, but few were familiar with the child who gazed out the windows of the palace at night, wondering if he was meant to be adored or eaten by a select few. Knew the young man had it all. Nonetheless, sat by himself in a golden prison. A few realized that his own creation was that the most damaging blows weren't delivered. They landed the ring in the silent areas. Between triumphs and the instances when no one else was looking, she desired people should keep in mind that Mike Tyson wasn't merely a warning or a headline story, he was a brilliant human being. Broken, humorous, scary, kind, and cruel occasionally. During the same hour, she didn't justify his errors, nor did she try to defend the suffering he inflicted others, but she desired for everyone to recognize that the story was based on a young man who had suffered harm long before perhaps you've ever learned how to harm other people. That's what true legacy is, she believed. Not the awards, not the controversies, perhaps even the comebacks are the truth. The messy, complex, and terrible reality of the price of living a life too big for one soul to bear. Once she's done narrating her tale, there is no victory in her tone was one of gentle, worn-out melancholy and a deep and silent affection for the boy she seen as it rose and fell behind the secured gates of a now demolished home. Mike Tyson will never be forgotten as the world's most evil man. But she will recall him as something different.